What's up? This is Ms. D, and this is your review of the Cold War. Now, bear in mind the Cold War lasts a really long time. It starts right after World War II, so that's about 1947, and lasts until 1991. So there's a lot of things that happened during this period. All right, to start, we're going to take a look at the impact of the Cold War on Europe. You may remember after World War II, the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin said, my country needs a buffer zone. We have enemies in Western Europe. We do not trust these capitalist democracies. And so I want to make sure that my country's Western border is protected. So all of the countries on the Soviet Union's western border, so that includes Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Stalin says they are not allowed to have free elections. These countries must be communist. And these countries are known as satellite nations because they basically, whatever the Soviet Union says goes in these countries. They take orders, they take direction from the Soviet Union. Of course, in Western Europe, um, this was, kind of shocking news. People weren't happy about it. You see, Winston Churchill makes a speech and he says, an iron curtain has fallen across Europe. And that's what he refers to, that kind of dividing line between the free nations of Western Europe versus the communist nations of Eastern Europe. Now, the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union is really, really bad during this period. However, the two countries do not engage in direct war. They can't because both of them are nuclear powers. The United States is the first one to develop a nuclear bomb. They used the atomic bomb during World War II. Remember, they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that is the first and last time nuclear bombs will be used in war. They've never been used again. That's why all the wars that follow, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, up to and including, the wars we have in Iraq and Afghanistan, we don't use any nuclear weapons. Instead, if you see the picture on the bottom, we have to use conventional weapons. We always use weaker weapons because once you open the door to using nuclear weapons, your enemy will use nuclear weapons. And so that you basically can't win a nuclear war. If you launch a nuke and then your enemy launches a nuke, both countries will be destroyed. There is potential for global nuclear destruction if you open the door to nuclear war. Um, so instead, the United States and the Soviet Union have to find other ways to compete. So you get things like the space race, where the Soviet Union is the first one to launch a satellite and have a cosmonaut in space, whereas the United States is the first one to get to the moon. Um, and with the Olympics, when the U.S. team is versus the Soviet team, it's always, and you see it in the movies, you see it in all kinds of propaganda. So, like I said, even though the United States is not going to engage in direct military conflict with the Soviet Union, we are concerned about communism. We do not like communism. We do not like communism. We want to stop it. But we're not looking to destroy it. Instead, our U.S. foreign policy is designed to contain it. Our U.S. foreign policy is containment. We want to stop communism from growing. We want to prevent countries from turning communist. We want to limit the number of countries that adopt communism. And so that's the entire goal of the United States. And to do that, one of the ways you can stop communism from growing is basically one of the best weapons is money. You may remember under communism, communist leaders always promised land reform. They promised to take property, the means of production away from the wealthy and distribute it among the other people in society, the poorer people in society. So a country that's poor ends up a lot of people who are poor. The ideas of communism sound really good. So one of the things the United States does is uses money. So that's where you get the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The United States promises millions and millions of dollars first to Turkey and Greece. That's the Truman Plan. Later, we give money to Europe, to Western Europe, many millions and millions of dollars to rebuild their economies to prevent the spread of communism. That's what the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan were designed to do, stop the spread of communism. All right, so that was a quick introduction to the Cold War. Now I'm going to kind of switch over, and one of the biggest events that happens during this period is the Communist Revolution in China. And you may remember that communist revolution is led by Mao Zedong. You may remember the picture on the left. He was the leader. He led the communists on the Long March where they went through the countryside of China. And one of the big reasons why the communists were successful was because they gained the support of the peasants. During the Long March, it allowed for a lot of contact between Mao and the communists and the peasants. And so they were able to promote this idea of communism, and specifically the idea of land reform, that the peasant farmers would no longer have to pay money to these landlords, that the land would be redistributed. That's always a winning argument. It's always a winning argument because most communist countries, when Marx and Engels came up with the idea of communism, they thought communism would happen in industrialized nations like Britain. They thought, oh, these poor workers working in these factories, they're going to get miserable. They're going to have this, the proletariat is going to overthrow the bourgeoisie. It's going to be this violent revolution. In fact, the most countries, I can't even think of one offhand that wasn't, but all the countries I can think of, certainly all the ones that we study, the places where they have communism is countries that are not industrialized. It's been countries that have a huge agricultural population where most of the population is poor farmers. So this promise of land reform is very, very popular and it gains them a lot of support, a lot of popular support. Now, of course, you remember Mao's leadership of China did not go well. What happens is the in his second 5-year plan, his first 5-year plan, borrowed a lot of ideas from what the Soviet Union did. But in the second 5-year plan, he comes up with a new idea. Instead of just having collective farms like they had in the Soviet Union, Mao launches this idea for communes. Communes are huge collective farms. I mean, they're massive. They're like the size of a town. They have 25,000 people in just one commune. And the idea is that all these people are going to work together to farm the land, and all of their needs will be taken care of by the commune. So, for example, the commune would provide childcare so women could leave their children in the childcare and go off to work. The commune would have a cantina, so you wouldn't even have to cook for yourself. You would be able to work and then come and have your meals prepared for you on the commune. In addition, these communes were going to even produce steel in these backyard furnaces. So this was Mao's great idea to increase agriculture and industrial production. Is this big great leap forward? Now you may remember, as the funny meme on the left shows, did not go well. The Great Leap Forward was a huge failure, and what it ended up producing is widespread famine. 20 to 43 million people die in just 4 years. And you may be looking at that number like there's a huge difference. 20 million to 40 to over 40 million, that's a huge difference. And the problem is so many people died, we don't have good numbers. I mean, this is also a communist nation, so it's not like we have free access to information or a free press that was tracking this. We just have estimates. I mean, millions of tens of millions of people died. And why? And it's because these communes were so badly mismanaged. They had to take orders from the central government of what to plant, where to plant it. Terrible, terrible decisions being made. They told the people in the commune, kill all the sparrows because the sparrows eat the seeds. And everybody ends up killing the sparrows. Well, hello, genius. The sparrows ate the insects that kill your plants. So now you've killed off all the sparrows. There's so many insects, a lot of the crops die. And I mean, just tons of things like this that just go terribly, terribly wrong. Of course, the backyard furnaces were a mess. If you remember, I told you they ended up taking everything made of iron, pots, tools, useful things, throwing them in these backyard furnaces. They would cut down all the trees so they would be able to build big enough fires to work these furnaces. And meanwhile, they produced garbage metal. They didn't produce steel. It was garbage. They took useful things and turned them into trash and destroyed the whole environment. I mean, it was a mess. It was a mess. And the worst part was, if you got up the courage and you said, Mao, or you said to the government, look, we can't make our quota. This isn't working. My people are starving. We're not producing food. Instead of saying, well, thank you for the feedback, let's adjust the plan. Oh, no. They said, oh, there's a problem. You're the problem. You caused this problem. If you're not producing enough food, you made the mistake. You are a counter revolutionary. You are a bourgeoisie. You are an enemy of the revolution. And next thing you know, if you complained, you end up in prison or wind up dead. So naturally, you get this thing where everybody lies and everybody, oh, everything's going great. And you end up taking whatever food you produce, you send it all to the city so you won't get caught. And meanwhile, all of the people on the communes are starving. It's just widespread famine. It was terrible. And this ended up, I mean, it was so bad that Mao ended up having to step down as the leader of China. You may remember he kept his role as the leader of the Communist Party, um, and then tried to come back to power with the Cultural Revolution. Remember, that was the movie I showed you in class. Remember where the little kids were running the hospital because all of the older leaders, the people who actually had skills, they were put in jail because they were, a threat to society. If you were smart, if you were educated, if you were any kind of leader, you were a threat to Mao. You were one of the four olds. And it was the young people of the Red Army. They were the ones who were going to, you know, create this cultural revolution and get China back on track. And again, it was another mess where he killed millions of people again. So finally, Mao dies. And that brings an end to the Cultural Revolution. And so China's finally able to get back on track. And the man who is responsible for that is Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping comes to power after Mao's death. And he has to turn China around. He's got to bring back industry and agriculture. And he does it through a program known as the Four Modernizations. So he modernized agriculture and sciences, things like that. And now, if you remember, under Mao, if you were educated or anything like that, you were seen as a threat. It was a bad thing. Under Deng, he makes being smart cool again. You can see it in all the propaganda that sciences and education were all very, very positive. So he's able to modernize the country. In addition, he brings in a market economy. He starts to free the markets. You may remember under Mao, China had a typical communist economy. That was an economy where the government owned all the means of production. The government set production targets. The government set prices. Under Deng Xiaoping, that ends. And now supply and demand are how prices are set. It's between the consumer and the producer. And the business owners, business people, business managers, farmers, they have more say in the running of their businesses. And it ends up being very successful. The problem, of course, is that a lot of the young people in China thought this is great. We're freeing our markets. We're taking these steps away from communism. If we're going to step away from a communist economy, the next step is to take a step away from communism in our government. We should have more democracy. So these young people staged this multi-day protest in Tiananmen Square, demanding democracy. And what ended up happening is Deng Xiaoping sent in the army, he sent in the tanks, and a lot of these kids got killed. They were shot, they were arrested, they were kicked out of the country. The entire revolt was put down. Tiananmen Square, this protest really showed that while the market will be free, the people will not. That's why even today, China does not have a free press. The government has a lot of control over the people. If you are any kind of dissident, if you go against the government, you can wind up in jail. So that was one of these disappointments that Deng Xiaoping, who people had thought, oh, this is great, he's becoming more like the West. Not after Tiananmen Square. That was over. And you remember, this is a government, like I said, it's a totalitarian government. They even tell you how many kids you can have. I mean, this is, they rule the people. All right. So now that we went through China, let's get back to the Cold War and take a look at some of the conflicts that we see during this Cold War era. Now, of course, the big two are the Korean War and the Vietnam War. The Korean War, you may remember, Korea was split at the 38th parallel. North Korea was communist, South Korea was democratic. Again, Vietnam, same issue. North Vietnam is communist, South Vietnam is democratic. I mean, really had more of a dictator, but technically. But anyway, I will say this: the South of Korea and the South of Vietnam both had pro-West, anti-communist leaders. Okay, whereas the North were communist. So now the United States, I mean, you remember those days in World War II where the United States is like, listen, it's not my problem. We're neutral. We stay out of it. It's not our business. And it takes an attack on a U.S. city, on a U.S. state, on the state of Hawaii, the U.S. state of Hawaii. It's not until that attack happens the United States says, oh, okay, now we got to fight. Oh, those days are over. Those days are over. In North Korea, the United States gets involved as part of a mission of the United Nations. In Vietnam, we just straight up go in there. We don't declare war, but we declare. I mean, it basically is a war, though, even though it was technically undeclared. But the president sends our troops into Vietnam, and this is a country. It wasn't our colony. This was a French colony, and yet we get involved because the idea was is that the United States had to get involved. Remember, our policy was containment. We had to stop the spread of communism. And for both of these wars, especially for Vietnam, there was really this belief, if you remember, in the domino theory, that if you allowed one country to fall to communism, all the other countries of Southeast Asia would follow. So that's why we ended up committing all of these troops, all of these military into these two engagements to stop the spread of communism. Now, the Korean War ends with a ceasefire. Korea, even till today, remains split. The north of Korea is communist, the south is democratic. So if you remember, we watched that video, right? Remember with the basketball, with the, what's his name from the Bulls that he goes and visits, and remember all the people crying and clapping, and they go into the computer lab and the people don't even know how to use the computers because he has complete totalitarian control over his entire nation. And remember, they showed you that supermarket, but nobody in Korea ever buys anything there. That's just for propaganda. The people of North Korea are starving. I mean, that economy, that country is a mess. They spend all their money on nuclear weapons. It's a mess. That North Korea, that communist North Korea, is a mess. South Korea, meanwhile, has a booming economy. It's doing great. That's a picture of the big city of Seoul. Remember, we talked about they have Kia cars. They got K-pop bands. They're, the difference between the two economies is very, very stark. All right. Vietnam is a different story. In Vietnam, the communists win and the United States loses. Now you're going to take a look, a bit much bigger look at this when next year when you take US history, you'll see that photo on the bottom right. That's the fall of Saigon, where the United States says we're going to leave and we just have to get out all of our people as quickly as possible because basically as soon as the United States leaves, the communists storm the South and take over. So again, we couldn't win because Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader of North Vietnam, gained the support of the peasants. How? By promising land reform, just like we've seen over and over again. It makes him a very popular leader, and the United States just can't win. And then within this same era, um, we had the government destabilized in part because of the U.S. bombings. You see the Cambodian government fall, and you get the rise of a communist government in Cambodia led by Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. Khmer Rouge is his communist army. And you may remember, Pol Pot's a lunatic. He was that nut job who destroyed Cambodia, ended up killing 25% of his own people. You ended up having this year zero where he views the people who live in Cambodian cities as the enemy. Remember, that's where you see in the top right, all the people of the city were forced to flee Phnom Penh and all the cities and get sent out to the countryside to work as peasants because peasants are the true communists. And this, the year of the revolution becomes year zero. He even has his own calendar. I mean, this guy was nuts. And then, not only that, but you remember we looked also at the prison that he ran. And that, how all these people were tortured and murdered. And that's where you get the killing fields, where you have just these mass graves of just thousands of people. He killed his own people. And the Cambodian genocide was it's just horrific. I'm sure you remember our discussion in class. All right, and then finally, the last topic we covered was the Cuban Revolution. This is where Fidel Castro, with the assistance of Che Guevara, overthrow the government of Batista. Batista was a U.S. ally, and he was overthrown. And again, why? Because Fidel Castro gained the support of the peasants. How? By promising land reform. All right, there was a lot of corruption and things in the Batista government. The people were unhappy, and Fidel Castro was able to overthrow the government there. And of course, this very much upset the United States. We're still mad about it because we have this communist government that is so close to the United States, only about 40 miles away from Florida. And of course, the big thing that Cuba is known for, and again, you're going to study this a lot next year in US, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. What happens during the Cuban Missile Crisis is the USSR plans to basically put nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs in Cuba. Now, if you've got nuclear bombs in Cuba, I mean, those things are going to launch, they're going to hit the US. We're not even going to have time to retaliate. Remember, that was the whole thing about using nuclear bombs. If you use nuclear bombs on us, we're going to use them right back at you. But you put those bombs in Cuba, those bombs are going to get to the United States so quickly, we may not even have a chance to respond. It's a very dangerous situation. So what had happened was U.S. space planes, spy planes, had seen these nuclear missile sites being built. Because of course you can't just drop off nuclear bombs and let them sit out. You have to build the silos and build the places where they'll be stored. And our spy planes see this, and President Kennedy says, "Oh no no no, we'll go to war over this. You're not putting nuclear bombs there." And there's a big standoff between the United States and the USSR. We came very, very, very close to World War III. We were ready to go to war over this. And as you can see in the map, if you see that dotted line that circles Cuba, that was a blockade. The United States literally blocked off Cuba. We did not let any ship come or go from Cuba because we were like, you are not dropping those, you are not bringing nuclear bombs and dropping them into Cuba. And luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and the USSR said, fine, we will not, we will take our missiles out of Cuba. And the United States took our missiles out of Turkey, and, things settled down. But we got very close to war. So luckily, after that, tensions between the two nuclear superpowers relaxes. Of course, we're going to talk about this more when we get into the fall of the Soviet Union. But if you remember our discussion of the Berlin Wall is built very early during the Cold War. And when that Berlin Wall falls in 1991, this marks the end of the Cold War. This is a big symbol of the end of the Cold War. The fall of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was one of these. Like I said, the Iron Curtain you couldn't see, you couldn't touch. It was just something, it was something that we spoke about, but it was very symbolic. It was a symbolic thing. The Berlin Wall was an actual wall. You could touch it, you could see it, and it was blocking the free West Berlin from East Berlin. And when that wall falls, that is basically the big symbol of the end of the Cold War. All right, with that, you are all done. Good luck on your exam, and I'll see you in class.